30 Days of Persuasion Plays with me, Paul Macetta. Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to go to classic NLP. And what we're going to talk about is the fact that the map is not the territory. The map is not the territory. So this is a classic presupposition in NLP. So what a presupposition is, basically is an assumption. So when you first start studying NLP, you're going to be exposed to a number of different presuppositions, which are basically assumptions that you have to take on if you are to really understand how NLP works. And one of the very first ones, one of the most important ones, is that the map is not the territory. So what does that mean? It means that each person has a different mental map of the world. So the world is the territory. The world is reality. But reality is actually a very subjective thing because everyone's version of reality is very different. You know, they say if you put an apple in front of a group of 30 people, each person would see that apple slightly differently. And I mean, an apple is a very objective thing. It's a fruit, it's red, we know what it looks like, we know what it tastes like, yet every person would see that and perceive that apple slightly differently. So the map is not the territory. If I was looking at a map on my phone, I like to use the Waze application. So if I was searching through my phone and I had somewhere to go and I opened up the Waze app and started figuring out where I want to go, I would get something that looks like this. I don't know if you could see it, but I would get this digital GPS map, right? But what does this represent? Really what it represents is a physical territory. It represents a physical location. Yet, if I drove to that location, so right now, this is pinging where I am, right here. You see Staten Island, New York, home of the brave, baby. If I went outside and looked outside, this is not what I'm going to see, right? So this is a digital representation of the location outside, right? It's a digital representation of reality, of the territory. Well, each one of us has a mental representation of the world and the territory. So the maps that we use are not the actual territory. So what you got to realize when you attempt to influence or specifically persuade someone is that their map of the world is definitely going to be different than yours, and in some cases it can be drastically different than yours. Not everyone thinks and perceives things the same way. And oftentimes, and this circles back to one of the earlier videos where I said you got to focus more on being persuasive than being right, oftentimes you might find yourself in a situation where you're trying to persuade someone to do something and maybe the objection that they're giving you makes no logical sense. Like you're saying to yourself, this person is an idiot. They are rejecting my offer for a reason that makes absolutely no sense. And so you keep trying to focus on why their answer or their objection doesn't make any logical sense instead of figuring out a way to persuade them to say yes. And the very first step in persuading them to say yes is understanding and realizing that the reason why their objection makes no logical sense to you is because their map of the territory in this particular case or on this particular topic is probably different than yours. So the key is you got to figure out exactly what their map is. You got to look for clues on that. So number one is switch perceptual positions. So in NLP, we have 3 perceptual positions. Position number 1 is your position, where you stand, who you are, the way you see the world. Position number 2 is the way the other person sees the world. So that's where you're able to put yourself in their shoes and start to see things through their lens. And then the third position, which is the most powerful, is the ability to step outside both of them and look almost as a third-party observer and watch the interaction from afar and see yourself and them and how you're interacting and how your maps may be different from one another. Next step is to reframe. So if you're presenting something in a certain context and it doesn't seem to be working, change the frame, reframe the way you're presenting it to them. And again, circling back, my three basic go-to techniques for this are metaphors, stories, and analogies. So if you're constantly driving home a point that the person is not accepting, and in your mind you're saying that it doesn't make logical sense for them not to accept it, first realize that their map is probably different than yours, and then reframe by either telling them a story about the point that you're trying to make, utilizing a metaphor or an analogy which helps them to see it in a different way. And then the third and most important thing is to be empathetic. So instead of becoming defensive and getting mad that the person isn't making logical sense because they're not agreeing with you, realize another NLP presupposition, which is that people are basically doing the best that they can. So behind every behavior, thought, intention, no matter how illogical or crazy those things may seem to you, is a good intention. So people believe, even when they're doing the most heinous, illogical, insane things, that there's some sort of a benefit to them. They believe, for one reason or another, that it's for their own good. There's some benefit coming from it. So even people who smoke cigarettes, who know the dangers of it, still in the back of their mind believe that in some way, shape, or form, there's a benefit being provided to them. So you have to be empathetic to that. You have to remember that not everyone sees the world in the same way. Accept that, reframe, pivot, and adjust.